You want to do the right thing, but right isn't clear anymore. The old morality doesn't work, and modern ethics is a mess of contradictions. Tonight, we're breaking down philosophical frameworks for ethics, justice, and meaning from utilitarianism to stoicism that show you how to make real decisions in a world that's lost its moral compass. If this resonates with you, a subscribe is appreciated. You'll need this. Let's begin. Idea 1. Absurdism. You spend your life searching for meaning. You want your work to matter, your relationships to have purpose, your existence to add up to something. And the universe responds with total silence. That gap between your need for meaning and the universe's indifference, that's the absurd. Absurdism is the philosophical position that there's an irreconcilable conflict between humanity's desperate search for meaning and a universe that offers none. We're meaning-seeking creatures trapped in a meaningless cosmos. Albert Camus said there are 3 responses to the absurd. The first is suicide if life is meaningless. Why continue? The second is philosophical suicide, inventing comfortable beliefs like religion to pretend the universe provides meaning when it doesn't. Both are escapes. The third response, the right one, is to accept the absurd and keep living anyway. Think about your life honestly. You worked 40 years. You climbed the ladder, earned promotions, saved for retirement. Then you retire. A few years later, you get sick. Then you die. Everything you built vanishes. Your accomplishments are forgotten. So, what was the point of those 40 years? Or raising your children? You sacrificed everything. You gave them opportunities, taught them values, poured your life into their success. They grow up. They move away. They live their own lives and gradually forget what you did. Was all that effort meaningful, or just biological programming? Camus used the Greek myth of Sisyphus to illustrate this. Sisyphus was condemned to push a boulder up a mountain forever. Every time he reaches the top, it rolls back down. It's pointless, repetitive, eternal futility. And Camus says, that's your life. But here's the crucial part. Camus says, we must imagine Sisyphus happy. Not because he's deluded about meaninglessness, but because he's fully aware of the absurdity and chooses to continue anyway. That choice to keep pushing the boulder while knowing it's pointless is the ultimate human rebellion. The right response isn't finding hidden meaning where there is none. It's living fully in a meaningless universe, precisely because that's the most honest and courageous thing you can do. Accept the absurd, smile at it, and push your boulder anyway. Not because it leads somewhere meaningful, but as an act of defiance against meaninglessness itself. Idea 2. Amor fati cancer, bankruptcy, divorce. Most people try to avoid suffering or just endure it when it comes. But amor fati goes further than acceptance. It says you should love your suffering, actively embrace it. Look at the worst things that happened and say, I wouldn't change a thing. Amor fati is Latin for love of fate. It's the idea that you should love everything that happens to you, not just tolerate it, not just accept it, but genuinely love it, including especially the painful parts. It's not passive resignation, it's active embrace. This comes from Nietzsche, who asked a radical question. If you had to live your exact life over and over for eternity, every triumph and humiliation, every joy and suffering repeated infinitely, would you say yes? If you can't, you're not living right. The test of living well is whether you choose to repeat it exactly as it is. Think about getting laid off at 50. You're too old to easily find equivalent work. Your retirement timeline is destroyed. Your identity is shattered. It's devastating. Most people would say, "I wish that hadn't happened." Amor Fati says love that it happened. That loss forced you to rebuild. It opened paths you never would have explored. It taught you resilience you didn't know you had. Or your son's addiction. It's hell watching him destroy himself. You feel helpless, angry, heartbroken. The normal response is to wish it away. Amor Fati says love this too. This suffering is teaching you patience you never developed. It's showing you the depths of your capacity to love unconditionally. If you could go back and prevent his addiction, you'd also prevent your own growth. This isn't toxic positivity. It's recognizing that who you are right now is the sum total of everything that happened, including the worst things. Remove any piece, even the painful pieces, and you remove the person you've become. Here's Nietzsche's test. Imagine you could go back and change the worst thing that ever happened. Would you? If you've truly lived with Amor Fati, the answer is no. Because changing that event would create a different person, and you've learned to love being exactly who you are. Don't just endure your suffering. Don't just accept it. Love it. See it as the hammer that forged you. Everything that happened, the good and the terrible, was necessary to create you. Idea 3, Stoicism. The stock market crashes. Your retirement account loses 40% overnight. You can't control that. Your wife criticizes you in front of your kids. You can't control what she says. You get diagnosed with cancer. You can't control your cells. But here's what you can control: how you respond. That's Stoicism. Stoicism is built on a simple distinction. There are things within your control and things outside your control. Your peace of mind depends entirely on focusing on the former and accepting the latter. Most people do the opposite. What's in your control? Your thoughts, your judgments, your responses, your effort. That's basically it. What's outside your control? Almost everything else. The economy, other people's opinions, your health, the past, the future. The Stoic insight is that suffering comes from trying to control the uncontrollable. You suffer not because the market crashed, but because you're raging against something you cannot change. You suffer not from events, but from your judgment about events. When your portfolio drops 40%, the Stoic response isn't, "This is fine." It's, "The market did what it did. I cannot change that. What I can control is my response. Do I panic sell? Do I stick to my plan? Do I adjust my timeline?" Focus on those decisions, not on rage about something that already happened. When your wife criticizes you, the Stoic doesn't pretend it doesn't hurt. The hurt is automatic. The suffering, "She shouldn't have said that. This is unfair," that's optional. Instead, "She said what she said. I cannot control her words. What I can control is whether I respond defensively or ask, 'Why do you feel that way?'" This is radically practical. When something bad happens, immediately ask, "What part of this is within my control?" If the answer is nothing, stop wasting energy. Accept it and focus elsewhere. If something is within your control, act on it immediately without emotional drama. Real freedom isn't getting everything you want. Real freedom is not needing everything you want. It's being unshakable, because external events can't control your internal state. Practice this every morning. Remind yourself that today you'll encounter things outside your control. People will be rude. Plans will fail. Prepare yourself not to be shaken. Idea 4. Epicureanism. When you hear Epicurean, you probably think expensive restaurants and fine wine. But the actual philosophy says almost the opposite. True pleasure doesn't come from luxury. It comes from simple things: bread, water, good friends. Epicureanism is the philosophy that pleasure is the highest good, but it's very specific about what kind. There are necessary pleasures: food, when hungry, water, when thirsty, shelter from cold. There are natural but unnecessary pleasures: fancy, food, sex, entertainment. And there are unnatural pleasures: luxury, status, endless consumption. Epicurus said, stick to the first category, minimize the second, avoid the third entirely. Why? Because unnecessary pleasures create more problems than they solve. That luxury car gives you a month of excitement. Then it becomes normal. Then you're stressed about payments, worried about scratches, anxious about whether neighbors have newer models. The pleasure was temporary. The stress is permanent. Compare that to a simple family dinner. Cheap food, simple conversation. The pleasure is modest but reliable. It doesn't create anxiety. It doesn't leave you wanting more. That's what Epicurus called ataraxia. Freedom from disturbance, a peaceful state where you're content with simple satisfactions. Think about what actually makes you happy. Is it the expensive steak or the conversation while eating it? Is it the luxury vacation or the time away from work stress? Usually, the thing we think we want is an expensive vehicle for something simple we actually need. You buy the BMW because you think it'll make you feel successful. What you actually want is self-respect, but the car won't give you that. You take the luxury cruise because you think you need exotic experiences. What you actually want is peace, but you could get that from a quiet week at home. Epicurus would say, figure out what you truly need for contentment, then ruthlessly cut everything else. Don't chase pleasures that require constant maintenance. Find the simple, reliable sources of pleasure and build your life around those. This isn't about deprivation, it's about efficiency. Why work 60 hours a week to afford luxuries that don't make you happier when you could work less, want less, and enjoy simple things more? Happiness doesn't come from having more. It comes from wanting less. Reduce your desires to match what you can easily obtain, and you're suddenly rich. Idea 5. Hedonism. You're going to die. Everything you build will crumble. Everyone you love will be gone. So why not maximize pleasure right now? Why not pursue every satisfaction available while you can? That's hedonism. Pleasure is the only thing that matters. Hedonism says pleasure is good, pain is bad, and life's purpose is to maximize the former and minimize the latter. But it's controversial because hedonism doesn't just say, pleasure is nice. It says pleasure is the only thing that's ultimately valuable. The basic argument is seductive. If you're honest, every other value ultimately reduces to pleasure or pain. You want wealth because it makes life comfortable, and comfortable feels good. You want accomplishment because achievement feels satisfying. Strip away rationalizations, and you're always chasing feelings. So the hedonist says, stop pretending it's about anything else. Admit you're seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. Then optimize for that, honestly. But here's where it gets tricky. There's short-term and long-term hedonism. Short-term hedonism says, do what feels good right now. Drink because drinking feels good. Sleep around because sex feels good. Quit your job because work feels bad. This version destroys lives because immediate pleasures often create long-term pain. Drinking feels good until you're an alcoholic. casual sex feels good until you're 45 alone and incapable of intimate connection. Quitting feels good until you're broke and desperate. The pleasure is real, but temporary. The consequences are real and lasting. Smart hedonism would factor in future pain and optimize for total lifetime pleasure, not just immediate sensation. But that starts to look less like hedonism and more like strategic thinking. Where pure hedonism goes wrong is treating all pleasures as equal. The pleasure of heroin is intense, but it destroys your capacity for other pleasures. The pleasure of an affair might be real, but it demolishes trust. Some pleasures are toxic. They feel good, but poison everything. The deeper problem is that pursuing pleasure directly often fails. Happiness tends to come as a byproduct of doing meaningful things. The pleasure of accomplishment requires the pain of effort. The pleasure of connection requires the risk of vulnerability. Hedonism isn't wrong that pleasure matters. It's wrong that pleasure is all that matters. And it's wrong to think you can maximize pleasure by chasing it directly. Balance short and long term. Balance pleasure and meaning. Hedonism without wisdom is just addiction with a philosophy degree. Idea 6. Utilitarianism. A runaway train is heading toward 5 people tied to the tracks. You're standing next to a lever. If you pull it, the train switches to a different track where only one person is tied up. Do you pull the lever? Kill 1 to save 5. That's the trolley problem. And your answer reveals whether you think like a utilitarian. Utilitarianism is the ethical theory that says the right action is whatever produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. Consequences are all that matter. If killing 1 person saves 5, the math is simple, do it. The logic seems straightforward. 5 lives are worth more than 1 life. 5 families stay intact instead of 1. More total happiness, less total suffering. Pull the lever without hesitation because the outcome is clearly better. But now change the scenario. You're on a bridge above the tracks. The train is heading toward 5 people. Next to you stands a large man. If you push him off the bridge onto the tracks, his body will stop the train and save the 5. Same math, kill 1 to save 5. Do you push him? Most people who'd pull the lever won't push the man. But utilitarianism says there's no difference. Both result in 1 dead, 5 alive. The method doesn't matter. Only the outcome counts. Take it further. A healthy patient comes to the hospital for a checkup. 5 other patients will die soon without organ transplants. A utilitarian surgeon could kill the healthy patient, harvest his organs and save 5 lives. 1 dead, 5 alive. Same math as the trolley. Should the surgeon do it? Your gut screams no. But utilitarianism struggles to explain why not. Or consider taxation. Taking money from the wealthy and giving it to the poor increases total happiness. A millionaire losing $100,000 suffers less than 100 poor families gaining 1,000 each. The utilitarian calculation says redistribute. But at what point does redistribution become theft? Utilitarianism has trouble drawing that line because it only cares about outcomes, not about rights or fairness. Here's the fundamental problem. Utilitarianism treats people as interchangeable units in a happiness calculation. It can justify sacrificing individuals for the collective. It can justify profound injustice against minorities if it benefits the majority. There's no protection for individual rights when the math says violate them. Your business partner embezzled funds but used them to fund scholarships for poor kids. Net happiness increased. Does that make it right? A utilitarian might say yes. Most people say absolutely not. Consequences matter. Of course they do. But they're not everything. Some actions are wrong even if they produce good outcomes. Some principles can't be sacrificed for better results. There are lines you don't cross even if crossing them would maximize happiness. Idea 7. Deontology. A killer is hunting your family. He knocks on your door and asks, "Are they here?" If you lie, your family lives. If you tell the truth, they die. What do you say? Most people would lie without hesitation. But strict deontology says you must tell the truth. Always. Because lying is inherently wrong, regardless of consequences. Welcome to one of the hardest moral positions to actually live by. Deontology is the ethical theory that certain actions are right or wrong in themselves, regardless of outcomes. You have absolute duties like don't lie or don't kill that you must follow, even when breaking them would produce better results. The philosopher Immanuel Kant argued that moral rules must be universal. If everyone lied whenever it suited them, communication would become impossible. Therefore, lying is always wrong. Not sometimes wrong, not usually wrong, always wrong, even to save your family from a murderer. This sounds insane until you think about the alternative. If you allow lies when consequences seem good, who decides when consequences are good enough? Suddenly, everyone's lying. For good reasons, and trust collapses anyway. Deontology says some things are absolutely forbidden. Lying, killing innocent people, using others merely as means to your ends. These aren't suggestions. They're commands that admit no exceptions. Think about torture. A terrorist knows where a bomb is planted. Torturing him might make him talk and save 1,000 lives. Utilitarianism says torture him, the outcome justifies it. Deontology says no. Torture violates human dignity. It treats a person as merely a tool for your purposes. Some acts are wrong even when they produce good results. Or consider justice. A mob demands you execute an innocent man, or they'll riot and kill hundreds. The utilitarian calculation says execute him one death versus hundreds. Deontology says absolutely not. Killing an innocent person violates a fundamental moral rule. You don't get to murder people because the consequences of not murdering would be worse. Here's what's powerful about deontology. It protects individuals from being sacrificed for the collective. It says, human dignity isn't negotiable. It draws bright lines that can't be crossed no matter how appealing the justification sounds. But here's what's brutal. It can demand that you let terrible things happen when you could prevent them. It can require you to tell the truth to a murderer. It can forbid torture, even when it would definitely save innocent lives. The question is, are there actions you should never take regardless of consequences? Deontology says some principles are non-negotiable. Break them, and you lose your humanity even if you save lives doing it. Most people aren't pure deontologists. But deontology reminds us that we can't justify everything by pointing to good outcomes. Some acts are poisonous. Touch them, and you contaminate yourself. Idea 8. Virtue. Ethics. Stop asking, what should I do in this situation? Start asking, what kind of person should I be? That shift from action to character is the foundation of virtue ethics. Virtue ethics doesn't give you rules to follow or outcomes to maximize. Instead, it says, become a person of good character and right action will follow naturally. Focus on building virtues, courage, honesty, compassion, wisdom, and you won't need a rule book for every decision. This approach goes back to Aristotle, who argued that ethics isn't about following commandments or calculating consequences. It's about developing excellence of character through habit and practice. You become brave by repeatedly acting bravely. You become just by repeatedly acting justly. Virtue is built through consistent practice until it becomes part of who you are. Think about honesty. A deontologist doesn't lie because there's a rule against lying. A utilitarian doesn't lie when lying would produce worse outcomes than truth. But a virtue ethicist doesn't lie because she's an honest person. The action flows from character, not from calculation or obedience. You don't help the homeless man because it maximizes utility or because duty requires it. You help him because you're a compassionate person, and compassionate people help those in need. The act is an expression of who you are. This is radically different from rule-based ethics. Instead of memorizing principles and applying them, you cultivate internal qualities. Instead of asking, "What does the moral law require?" you ask, "What would a person of excellent character do?" Consider your son asking for money. You could calculate consequences. Will giving him money make him dependent or help him recover? You could consult rules. Do parents have duties to support adult children? Or you could ask, what would a wise, loving, and honest person do here? Virtue ethics points you toward character, not formulas. The virtues sit between extremes. Courage is the middle ground between cowardice and recklessness. Generosity is between stinginess and wastefulness. Honesty is between brutal bluntness and deceptive flattery. Excellence means finding the right balance. Here's what's powerful about virtue ethics. It recognizes that morality isn't just about individual actions, but about the kind of life you're building. You're not just deciding whether to lie in this moment. You're either becoming a dishonest person or reinforcing your honesty. It acknowledges that you can't reduce ethics to rules. Life is too complex. You need judgment, wisdom, and good character to navigate it. A virtuous person doesn't need detailed instructions because their character guides them. The challenge is that virtue ethics doesn't give easy answers. It says, be wise, be courageous, be just. And figuring out what that means in this specific situation requires the very wisdom you're trying to develop. But maybe that's the point. Ethics isn't about following an algorithm. It's about becoming someone worth being. Idea 9. Moral relativism. Americans think eating dog is horrifying. Koreans and Vietnamese consider it normal. Who's right? Moral relativism says both. Neither. The question itself is wrong because there is no universal right. Morality is relative to culture. Moral relativism is the position that ethical judgments depend on cultural context. What's right in one society might be wrong in another, and there's no objective standard to judge between them. You can't stand outside all cultures and declare one moral code superior. The argument seems obvious when you look at diversity. Some cultures practice arranged marriage. Others see it as oppression. Some value individual achievement. Others prioritize family duty. Some allow multiple spouses. Others call that immoral. These aren't misunderstandings. They're genuinely different moral frameworks, each internally coherent. Who are you to say your culture's morality is correct? That looks like arrogance, like assuming your particular upbringing gave you access to universal truth. Moral relativism says your morality is shaped by where and when you were born. If you'd been born in medieval Europe, you'd think slavery was acceptable. Your moral certainties are accidents of birth, not universal insights. Consider same-sex marriage. In America, it's legal and increasingly accepted. In much of the Middle East, it's punishable by death. The moral relativist says both societies have their own moral frameworks, and neither is objectively correct. You might prefer one, but that's because you're embedded in a particular culture. Or abortion. Half the country sees it as a woman's right. Half sees it as murder. Both sides cite values and reasoning. Moral relativism suggests maybe there is no fact of the matter. Maybe these are just different moral systems in conflict with no neutral ground to resolve them. This seems tolerant and humble. It prevents cultural imperialism, imposing your values on others. It encourages understanding different perspectives rather than condemning them. But here's where it collapses taken seriously. Moral relativism can't condemn anything. The Nazis had their moral code. Slaveholders had theirs. Is the relativist really willing to say, genocide is wrong for me, but not objectively wrong? That feels obscene. Most people who claim to be moral relativists aren't actually relativists all the way down. They draw lines. They say slavery is objectively wrong, not just wrong for our culture. They say torturing children for fun is evil regardless of what any culture believes. The truth is probably somewhere between. Some moral variation is real and acceptable. Different cultures can legitimately organize life differently. But some acts, genocide, slavery, torture for entertainment, are wrong regardless of cultural context. Respect cultural differences. Don't assume your way is the only way, but don't abandon the idea that some things are simply wrong, no matter who's doing them. Idea 10. Moral objectivism. Torturing infants for entertainment is wrong. Not wrong in my opinion. Not wrong for this culture. Just wrong. Objectively, universally, absolutely wrong. If you disagree, you're not offering an alternative viewpoint. You're mistaken about a moral fact. That's moral objectivism. It's the position that some moral truths exist, independent of what anyone believes or what any culture practices. Right and wrong aren't decided by majority vote or cultural tradition. They're discovered, not invented. Moral objectivism says slavery was always wrong, even when entire civilizations practiced it. The Nazis were objectively evil, not just evil from our cultural perspective. Torturing innocent people is wrong regardless of whether your society approves. These aren't opinions. They're truths. The argument goes like this. Some things really are better or worse for human flourishing. Societies that practice honesty function better than societies built on deception. Cultures that protect basic human dignity produce less suffering than cultures that don't. These aren't arbitrary preferences. They're objective features of how human beings actually work. Think about medicine. We don't say health is relative to culture just because different societies have different medical practices. Some practices work better than others. Antibiotics cure infections better than bloodletting. That's an objective fact. Moral objectivists say the same applies to ethics. Some moral systems are objectively better because they're more aligned with human nature. Consider child abuse. Every functional society prohibits it, and societies that don't have higher rates of trauma and dysfunction. This suggests that protecting children is objectively good, not just culturally preferred. The harm is real and measurable, regardless of what anyone believes. Or take honesty. Societies that value truth-telling have functional institutions and social trust. Societies where lying is accepted struggle with corruption and collapse. This isn't cultural bias, it's cause and effect. Moral objectivism doesn't mean every moral question has a clear answer. It means some answers are clearly wrong. You might debate fair taxation details, but you can't reasonably claim that enslaving people is acceptable. The alternative to objectivism is uncomfortable. If morality is just cultural opinion, then you can't condemn other cultures for anything. The Nazis had their values. If there's no objective moral truth, on what ground do you call them evil, rather than just different? Most people are objectivists about at least some moral claims. When you say, rape is wrong, you don't mean I personally disapprove. You mean it's actually wrong, and someone who disagrees is making a factual error about morality. Not everything is relative. Not everything is opinion. Some things are simply objectively non-negotiably wrong. And recognizing that isn't arrogance, it's moral clarity. Idea 11. Social contract. You stop at red lights even when no one's watching. You don't steal from your neighbor even though you could get away with it. You pay taxes even though you hate where some of the money goes. Why? Because you've entered into an unspoken agreement with everyone else in society. That's the social contract. The social contract is the philosophical idea that citizens implicitly agree to surrender some freedoms in exchange for the benefits of living in an organized society. You didn't sign a document. You didn't explicitly consent. But by living in society and accepting its benefits, you've tacitly agreed to follow its rules. The logic is simple. You want protection from violence, so you agree not to commit violence. You want property rights respected, so you agree to respect others' property. You want roads, hospitals, and police, so you agree to pay taxes. It's a trade. You give up absolute freedom to do whatever you want, and in return, you get security, order, and collective resources. Think about it practically. You don't refrain from killing people because murder is abstractly wrong. You refrain because you want to live in a society where people don't kill you. The contract is mutual. Everyone agrees to the same restrictions in exchange for the same protections. This explains government legitimacy. The government isn't just a powerful force that happens to control territory. It has authority because citizens have granted it that authority through the social contract. You follow laws not just to avoid punishment, but because you've implicitly agreed to follow them as part of the deal. But here's the crucial part. The contract works both ways. If the government violates its end, if it stops protecting your rights, becomes tyrannical, or breaks the fundamental terms, then the contract is void. You're no longer obligated to obey. In fact, you have the right to resist or overthrow it. The American Revolution was justified on these grounds. The colonists argued that Britain had violated the social contract by imposing taxation without representation and denying basic rights. The contract was broken, so rebellion was legitimate. You see this playing out constantly in smaller ways. When government becomes corrupt or stops serving the public good, citizens lose faith in it. They start evading taxes, ignoring laws, withdrawing cooperation. The social contract is fraying because one party violated the terms. Here's what this means for you. You live in a society that provides enormous benefits you didn't create, roads you didn't build, laws that protect your property, emergency services available when you need them. You benefit from the contract every single day. That means you have obligations. Pay your taxes. Follow laws even when inconvenient. Contribute to the collective good. You don't get to enjoy all the benefits while refusing all the costs. If you truly can't accept the terms, you have two options: work to change the contract through legitimate means or leave the society. But as long as you stay and benefit, you're bound by the deal you implicitly made. Society is a transaction, not a gift. You receive, so you must give. Idea 12. Civil disobedience. Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus. She knew it was illegal. She knew she'd be arrested. She did it anyway. And that act of deliberately breaking an unjust law helped change history. That's civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is the practice of intentionally breaking a law you believe is unjust, doing so publicly and non-violently, and accepting the legal consequences to highlight the injustice and pressure for change. It's not just breaking laws you don't like. It's a specific form of moral protest with clear characteristics. First, it must be public. You're not sneaking around. You're openly defying the law to make a point. Second, it must be non-violent. You're not harming people or destroying property. Third, you accept punishment. You go to jail willingly to demonstrate the sincerity of your conviction. The philosophy behind civil disobedience says that legal and moral aren't the same thing. A law can be legally valid but morally wrong. And when that happens, obeying the law might actually be the immoral choice. Martin Luther King Jr. practiced this extensively. He deliberately violated segregation laws, sitting in whites-only sections, leading marches without permits. He was arrested repeatedly, but those arrests exposed the brutality of the system. The sight of peaceful protesters being beaten and jailed for demanding basic rights shocked the nation and forced change. Henry David Thoreau went to jail rather than pay taxes, funding a war he considered unjust. He argued that if a law requires you to be an agent of injustice to another, then break the law. Your conscience is a higher authority than the state. Here's what makes civil disobedience legitimate. It's not about personal convenience. It's about fundamental moral principles. You're not dodging taxes because you want more money. You're refusing to fund a war you believe is immoral. You're not ignoring traffic laws because they annoy you. You're sitting at a segregated lunch counter because human dignity demands it. And crucially, you accept punishment. This distinguishes civil disobedience from ordinary law-breaking. The criminal tries to escape consequences. The civil disobedient accepts them to prove this isn't about self-interest. It's about conscience. But civil disobedience is risky. It can destabilize society if everyone starts breaking laws they personally disagree with. That's why it should be reserved for genuine injustice, not mere policy disagreements. You don't practice civil disobedience over parking regulations. You reserve it for laws that violate fundamental human rights. When laws conflict with conscience, when legal systems enforce profound injustice, breaking the law can become the highest moral duty. Not in secret, not violently, but openly, peacefully, and with willingness to face the consequences. That's when breaking the law becomes more honorable than following it. Idea 13. Justice. Two people do the same job. One makes $50,000 a year. The other makes $150,000. Is that fair? The answer depends entirely on what you think justice means. Justice is the principle that everyone should get what they deserve. But that simple definition hides enormous complexity because people disagree violently about what deserve means. There are at least 3 major types of justice, each with different standards. Distributive justice deals with how resources should be allocated in society. Should everyone get equal shares? Should people get rewards proportional to their contribution? Should distribution be based on need? These are fundamentally different principles, and they lead to radically different societies. If justice means equality, then the doctor and the janitor should make the same income. They're both working, both contributing, both human beings of equal worth. Equal treatment means equal outcomes. If justice means merit, then the doctor should make more because she trained longer, works harder, or produces more value. People should be rewarded based on contribution, effort, or talent. This creates inequality, but it's fair inequality because it reflects genuine differences in what people put in. If justice means need, then the person with 4 kids and medical bills should receive more than the single healthy person, regardless of what they contributed. Justice is about ensuring everyone has enough to live with dignity, not about rewarding performance. Retributive justice is about punishment. When someone does wrong, what do they deserve? Should punishment be proportional to the crime? Should it aim to rehabilitate? Should it protect society? These different goals lead to different justice systems. Procedural justice focuses on fairness of process rather than outcomes. Did everyone get a fair hearing? Were the rules applied consistently? Even if you lose, it's just. If the process was fair, here's where it gets complicated in real life. Your business partner works 60 hours a week. You work 40. Should profits be split equally because you're partners, or 60? 40 because he works more? Both answers have justice arguments behind them. Your son is struggling financially while your daughter is successful. Do you give them equal inheritance because fair means equal? Or do you give your son more because fair means according to need? Justice doesn't tell you which is right. The truth is that justice isn't one thing. It's a balance between competing principles: equality, merit, need. Sometimes they align. Often they conflict. And when they conflict, you have to make difficult judgments about which principle matters most in this specific situation. Justice isn't a formula you can apply mechanically. It's an art of balancing legitimate but competing claims. And reasonable people will disagree about where that balance should fall. Idea 14. Retributive justice. Someone killed your son. The killer is caught. Now what do you want? Do you want him dead because that's what he deserves? Or do you want him rehabilitated? Your gut probably screams for the first option. That's retributive justice. Retributive justice is the theory that punishment is justified simply because the offender deserves it, not because it deters future crime, not because it reforms the criminal, just because wrongdoing deserves punishment. It's moral balance. The scales of justice demand it. The core idea is proportionality. The punishment should fit the crime. Steal a car, get a few years. Murder someone, get life or death. The severity of punishment should match the severity of wrongdoing. This seems intuitive. We instinctively feel that worse crimes deserve worse punishments. But retributive justice raises hard questions. Take the death penalty. Someone murders your child. Retributive justice says he took a life, so he should lose his life. Eye for eye. Blood for blood. That feels like justice. But critics ask, does killing the killer bring your son back? Does it make society safer? Or is it just legalized revenge? Retributive justice says those questions miss the point. Some acts deserve punishment regardless of consequences. Justice demands it, even if it accomplishes nothing practical. Or consider disproportionate sentences. Someone steals bread to feed their family and gets 20 years in prison. That's the plot of Les Miserables, but it happens in real life. Retributive justice gone wrong, punishment so far beyond the crime that it becomes injustice. Here's the tension. Retributive justice satisfies our emotional need for wrongdoers to suffer. When someone hurts you, you want them hurt back. That's deeply human. But it doesn't necessarily accomplish anything constructive. It doesn't fix the harm. It doesn't prevent future harm. It just inflicts suffering. Because suffering is deserved. Think about your own situation. If someone embezzled from your company, what do you want prison time? Because they deserve punishment or restitution because you want your money back, or rehabilitation because you want them to become better. Retributive justice chooses punishment over all other goals. It says the primary purpose of the justice system isn't to prevent crime or reform criminals or compensate victims. It's to ensure that wrongdoers suffer in proportion to the wrong they did. Because that's what justice means. The problem is that pure retribution can be cruel without being useful. It satisfies our anger but doesn't make the world better. The better approach might be balance. Retribution matters because proportionate punishment is just, but it shouldn't be the only consideration. Punishment should fit the crime, but it should also aim to heal, deter, and rehabilitate when possible. Justice requires that wrongdoers face consequences, but wisdom requires that consequences serve more purposes than just making them suffer. Idea 15. Restorative justice. Your teenage son got into a fight at school. The other kid has a black eye. What do you want to happen? Do you want the other kid expelled? Or do you want them to sit down, talk about what happened, understand each other, and figure out how to make it right? The first impulse is retribution. The second is restorative justice. Restorative justice is an approach that focuses on repairing harm and rebuilding relationships rather than just punishing offenders. Instead of asking, what rule was broken and what's the penalty? It asks, who was harmed? What do they need? And how can we make it right? The process typically involves bringing together the offender, the victim, and often the community. They sit down and talk. The victim explains how they were hurt. The offender has to face that harm directly and take responsibility. Together, they work out how to repair the damage through apology, restitution, community service, or changed behavior. Think about a teenager who vandalizes property. Traditional justice: arrest, trial, juvenile detention. The kid goes to jail, comes out, and probably hasn't learned anything except resentment. Restorative justice. The kid meets the property owner, sees the real impact of his actions, works to repair the damage, and makes a genuine apology. Which approach is more likely to actually change behavior? Or consider post-apartheid South Africa. The country faced a choice: punish everyone who participated in the brutal apartheid system or try to heal and move forward. They chose the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Perpetrators could confess their crimes publicly. Victims could tell their stories. The goal wasn't revenge, it was truth, accountability, and healing. Here's what makes restorative justice powerful. It treats crime as harm to people and relationships, not just violation of abstract rules. It gives victims a voice. It requires offenders to face the human consequences of their actions, which is often harder than just serving time. And it aims to rebuild rather than just destroy. But it's not soft. Facing your victim, taking real responsibility, and working to make genuine amends can be far more demanding than sitting in a cell. And it's not appropriate for every situation. Some crimes are too severe. Some offenders aren't capable of genuine accountability. The question is what you want justice to accomplish. If you want the satisfaction of seeing someone punished, retributive justice gives you that. If you want actual healing, changed behavior, and repaired relationships, restorative justice offers a path. Your business partner embezzles funds. You can prosecute, send him to prison, and feel vindicated. Or you can require full restitution, a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and a plan to prevent it happening again. One satisfies your anger. The other might actually fix the problem and preserve what can be preserved of the relationship. Real justice isn't just about inflicting pain on wrongdoers. It's about healing wounds, changing behavior, and rebuilding trust where possible. Punishment has its place, but restoration should be the goal when it can be achieved.